let's start by taking a look at the projects we're going to do in today's Zoom session. We're going to start with launch screens and splash screens. And so the launch screen comes up momentarily, just for a split second, while the application is being loaded. But then in this project, we're going to launch into a splash screen, which presents an animation using a timer for 5 seconds, showing 5 different images, a second each, and then navigates to the main program. And that splash screen might be used just to show the user something's happening in terms of data being loaded, might take some time, or it just might be a branding issue. So here's the launch splash screen. And if you watch closely, you'll see the splash screen, which is a background of yellow with a graphic, just for a split second. Then you're going to see the animation of the splash screen, and then it's going to programmatically navigate to the main screen. Here we go. And did a nice little page curl there that I just came across this morning, and I'll show you how that's done. Then we're going to do a timer animation. This is in UIKit. And here I'm going to present a goose flying across the screen of 4 different images being used as a sequence of 6. And we'll add some buttons to be able to pause the goose and resume the goose, as well as to take the goose up or to bring the goose down. And we'll limit the down motion to the very bottom, and the up will create a ceiling where it can't go above our field of view. Then we're going to do the same thing with the sprite kit. Same goose, basically the same application. We're going to have the goose flying across. We're going to be able to pause the goose and resume the goose. And again, be able to make it ascend. And let it go a little bit higher this time, but still can't go off the screen, and descend. And can't go below the bottom, so create a floor. And so we'll do that with the sprite kit. The buttons here are also sprites. And then finally, I'm going to show you how to work with Swift UI. Just a real brief introduction based on a tutorial that Apple has put together to demonstrate Swift UI and to get you started. I'm going to walk you through kind of a revised version of that Swift UI tutorial. And we're going to present a screen for a South Mountain app. We're going to use a map kit to show the location of South Mountain based on latitude and longitude. We'll present an image, and we're going to shape that image into a circle, provide a nice outline and a drop shadow, and then information about South Mountain is text, and then 3 buttons that allow us to change the image that's in the circle, from the library to students to graduates. And that's all done programmatically with assets in the assets catalog. So that is our process for today, or our plan for today. Before we get started, any questions, concerns, comments?
Nope.
Okay, everybody else is good? All right. Well, let's take a look. Actually, before we do anything, let's go into Canvas, because there's some files I'd like you to grab. And move Zoom out of the way here. So if you go into Canvas and go down to week 14, there's a zip file called iOS 7. This is week 7, summer 2020. And you'll download that. It's got a bunch of stuff in it that we're going to use today. I keep thinking I forgot something in that zip, and we may come across something I need to add later, but hopefully it's everything we need. I'm just going to unzip mine. And what you're going to see in here once you unzip it is There's a whole bunch of images, PNG images. I'm going to view mine by name. I think I might be missing one. Should be 3 blown away images. There's only 2. That's okay. We can get by with just the 2. And then some button images. These are the button images I used in the sprite goose animation, or goose sprites. These are the images we'll use in the South Mountain Swift UI. And then we're going to start with the splash screen images. And here's 5 different images, each at 3 different views, and a sound effect that we're going to use. So, all right, so I'm going to leave those there. And let's go into Xcode. Just make sure that we are still recording. All right. So I'm going to start with just a new project. And I'm going to call this one Launch Splash Demo. And for our user interface, we're going to use storyboards. And each of these will be projects that will turn in. So I'm going to put those together later this afternoon so you can submit these. All right. For this one, I'm just going to make it portrait. Not that really matter, but we're going to design it as a portrait screen. And then you may have noticed that all of our projects have something called a launch screen storyboard. Looks just like our main storyboard, but they are 2 different things. And just to demonstrate what the launch screen does, I'm just going to take my view here and get stuff out of the way. Okay, I'm going to take my view and I'm going to go into the background for that view and just give it some color. Doesn't really matter what color you give it. Let's say red. And I'm going to run this in the simulator. And what you're going to see is a little white background that just kind of splashes up there for maybe a second, if even that. Everybody see that? Run it again. Sometimes it loads faster once it's already been put on the simulator, but we'll try it again. Quick splash of white. Well, what you're seeing in that quick splash of white is the launch storyboard. And the intention of the launch storyboard is simply to tell the user something's happening. The human interface guidelines suggest that this should look very similar to your actual application, but maybe a message that says loading or something. So we're just going to use this just very, very quickly. And then we're going to do a splash screen, which can do some animations and things like that. All this can handle, and what a lot of people do here is just the title of the application and maybe their name, or maybe it says loading. But normally you're only going to see this for a split second, unless something goes awry, or it takes a long time to load the view controller. The splash screen, though, is going to also do some animation stuff. So for the launch screen, we're going to the assets. And I'm going to go to those images or the stuff we just downloaded. And we're going to take that image blown away. In fact, I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the 3x one and let's just plop that in. And I guess it's going to force this to do the other 2. So I'll add the 1x. We're missing the 2x, but I think we'll be okay. We can try, see if it'll let us do this. Take the 3x. I know what we'll do. If you'll duplicate that 3x, I'm going to duplicate the file. I'm going to change it to a 2x. So it's actually still 3 times the size rather than 2, but that's okay. This way it'll accept that that's a 2x image, even though it's a different, same size as a 3x. So the image is called Blown Away. I'm simply going to go to my launch storyboard. And I'm going to click on the view, and let's change the background color. I'm going to choose a kind of a light yellow. I'm going to bring up the library. And I'm going to place an image view onto the launch screen storyboard view. And my image is square, so I'm going to roughly get a square, and we'll do some constraints to fix that. But we're going to select our image of Blown Away. I'm just going to make this a little bit larger here. And then I'm also going to add a label. And in the label, I'm just going to put welcome loading. And I'll center that text. Okay, so now we're going to take our image and let's go to the constraints. I'm going to go to the alignment constraints, and I'm going to center that in my screen. So I'm going to click the horizontal in container and the vertically in container and add those 2 constraints. And then I'm going to click the new constraints button. It's the one to the right of the align. And I just want to give a little space between the edge and my graphic. So let's go 20 and 20. And then I'm going to choose the aspect ratio. I'm going to add those 3 constraints. And then with the label selected, I'm sorry, let's go back to the image. To the image, let's go look at the look at the size inspector, and I'm going to come down here to the constraints that are added. I always like to check the ratio because sometimes that gets a little squirrely. It should be 1:1 or 2:2 or 400 to 400, whatever. If it's not, just click the edit button and change the multiplier to 1:1. That'll make sure it's square. We should have an aligned center X. Trailing the safe area is 20. Leading or letting is 20. And centered on the Y. Let's add some constraints to our label. I'm just going to drag it down a little bit more. And I'm going to add 3 constraints here. We're going to make this so that it is also 20 and 20 to the edges. And then to the top, I want to make sure I'm looking at the blown away image. And let's maybe make it 40. I'm going to add those 3 constraints. Now when I run my application, I'm going to test it in the simulator, we should see the yellow background with the blown away image come up just very, very briefly. Oh, we didn't see that. And one of the things I discovered that sometimes causes problems is I'm going to go back to my simulator. So I've got it stopped. I'm going to open up the simulator, and I want to go to where all my applications are. And I'm going to get rid of the existing one. I'm just going to right click on it and choose delete app, and then choose delete. Then hopefully if we reload, we'll see.
Try that again.
So to get rid of something, all you need to do, pick another one here. I'm going to
Do you have to have
right
the
click.
simulator running?
I'm sorry?
Do you have to have the simulator running?
Yes, so you got to open up the simulator, go to the simulator. And if you have something running the simulator, just go up to the hardware and choose home. And then you might need to swipe over to see your applications. This is also what you want to do if you get that error message that your simulator is full. So I'm going to take this one. I'm just going to, whoops, go back to home. So I'm going to right click on what I want to get rid of and just choose delete app, and it'll ask you to confirm. And so I got rid of that launch splash demo one. I'm going to go back to Xcode. I'm going to run it again. There we see the launch screen very briefly, and it goes to our red view controller. Anybody not get that to work?
I'm having some trouble with my constraints.
Okay.
Some of them are turning red, but I think I have, or I thought I had the right constraints at least.
Okay, so let's just double check on those. So click on the image.
Okay.
And looking at your constraints, you should have an align center, X.
Oh, you know, I think I'm missing that one actually.
Okay.
How do I get the align center one?
So that's going to be on the align button down here. It's the two little rectangles. Open that up, and you'll have checkboxes for horizontally in container and vertically in container. You want both of those.
Okay, thanks. I guess I missed that step.
So, but let's just double check the others.
All right.
Well, it happens sometimes you can add multiple constraints, or gosh, I remember to add that constraint, and then you add another one. And so if this gets too busy, you want to come through and delete stuff. And again, to delete it, you can just select it and press the delete key. So we want a trailing 20.
Okay.
We want a leading to 20. And I'm not sure in this case if this is called leading or letting, because letting is usually the space you put in like setting up a type press. Is the space between words and paragraphs and so forth. So in this case, I'm not sure if this is considered leading since that's trailing.
Okay, yeah. It looks like that align center seems to have worked. I don't see any more red constraints.
Matthew actually reminded me of something I saw in a couple of projects that people have turned in recently. So whenever you're using a stat view, if you set it for equal spacing, it seems that sometimes a number gets put in for that equal spacing, and some people's had like 200 and something. And so whenever they were trying to do their constraints, it was trying to do the 222 or whatever number they had before it went to the constraints, and so they had a lot of red. So if you ever run into an issue when you're in a stack view and you're trying to do equal spacing and you get those constraints and you're like, I know I put it in right, I would go check out the amount there. So.
Okay, thanks.
So we've mentioned before, the constraints are really difficult to work with sometimes. It's one of the things I'm really excited about Swift UI. There are no constraints in Swift UI. I'm excited about being able to program the interface with code, which is the way I'd normally do it in other project or other languages and IDEs. Anyway,
That's okay.
Stephen, excuse me.
Yes.
Quick question. Having a leading and trailing constraint with the center constraint means if you were to run this on something wider like an iPad, it would scale the image?
it would.
I see.
So yeah, so there you could also do if you wanted more margins, you could go in and do a adaptive layout for the iPad versus the iPhone.
Right, like regular instead of this
So
trait class, yeah.
Yeah, there's also ways that you can do this programmatically, even with storyboards. And I don't have the code offhand, but you can go in, if you Google it, you can figure out there's some parameters or actually properties that you can find to tell what type of device the user is looking at. And then you can do some if structures, and you could actually change sizes of maybe this image. So that's
Right.
another way to go about it. Other questions? All right. Now, what we want to do is we want to do a little animated splash screen that also you might use if you're like loading back in data and maybe you're loading data off the internet. And if it's a huge file, it could take a little bit of time. So we want to do a little animation, just kind of let the user know something's going on. And again, we can't really time this. This is just going to be a split second. So we're going to add another view controller. So we have our view controller and we have our launch screen, which doesn't really have a view controller. But we're going to, actually what we're going to do is, let me change that a little bit. Before we do that, let's go to the main storyboard because we're going to add another view here. So I'm going to move this over a little bit and I'm going to bring up the library again. And this time I'm just going to search for a view. We'll take the view controller and just add it onto our storyboard. I'm going to put it over to the left of my main storyboard, just because it's going to load this first and then load that. I'll leave my library open for now. And I'm going to grab the little arrow to the left of our original view and drag it over to our new view. And then we're going to add a view controller Swift file for this. So I'm going to right click on the folder in our hierarchy and say new file. And we're going to add a Cocoa Touch class file. And I'm going to just simply call this Splash View Controller. And so we now have a Splash View Controller.swift file in our hierarchy. We're going to go to the Assets catalog. And this time we're going to find those splash screen images, which is our paintball splashes. So I'm going to take all 15 of them and just drag them over to the assets. Now the sequence that we're going to use here is actually kind of go backwards. We're going to start with Paintball Splash 5, which is just our target. And then we're going to go from 5 to 4 to 3 to 2 to 1. And with each new image coming in, we're going to use a timer to do this. It's going to do a new paintball splat. The other thing I want to do is add in a little sound effect here. So again, I'm going to right click on the folder and choose Add Files. And I want to go find the splat file, splat.mp3. that we downloaded. It's in that same folder. So splat.mp3 is what we want. Okay, I think that will do it for the images and the assets that we need. Let's go back to our main storyboard. I'm going to set up the view controller here. I'm going to come over to the identity inspector. It's the middle button on our inspector panel. And I want to assign a class to this view. And if we don't do that, we won't be able to add actions or outlets for this. So I'm going to, actually, if you just start to type in here splash, you're going to see splash view controller come up. It's also in the drop-down. And that was the file we created. So we're going to link that to that view controller Swift file that we created. Then in the library, like we did before, I'm going to add an image view. And again, I'm just going to kind of make it square. And let's just enlarge it. And for my image, I want to choose Paintball Splash 5 to start. I'm going to add a label below that. And I'm going to stretch the label out so it's got a little bit of space on between it and the margins or the edges. And my text is going to be opening in 5 seconds. I'm going to do 3 periods with spaces. And I'll make this a little bit bigger. I'm going to click on the font. Let's commit to that first. And then I'm going to click on the font. I'm going to make it bold. Let's bring the size up to 24. And I'm going to center it. Okay, so what would have happened is we're going to create a timer that every second is going to change this image. And we're going to do that in our code. So we're going to, oh, by the way, Kyra sent this really cool little trick that I didn't know. Let me go back to the storyboard here. If you come over here and I think it's option click on a file, go to option click on view controller, it'll create the assistant editor with that file. I think that's really cool. I'm just going to turn off my panel over here. Okay, so we're going to create some outlets for both of these items that we put on our storyboard. Well, let's set up our constraints first. I'm going to go back here. I'm just going to narrow this up a little bit. Okay, so let's select our image and let's center that also in our screen, horizontally and vertically. And as we did before, I'm going to add constraints to the left and the right, or leading and trailing. So I'm going to say 20 and 20. And I'm also going to choose the aspect ratio. So then just double check on those. In the inspector panel, I'm going to go to the size inspector. And we should have center X, trailing, leading, center Y. And the aspect ratio should be 1:1. If it's not, change it to 1:1.
I have a real quick question. Doing this in the view controller, or should we be doing it in the splash view controller?
Oh, we're going to want to do the code in the splash view controller. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, I was a little bit confused.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're out of the money. And we would have realized that when we tried to drag and create the outlet in the view controller, it wouldn't let us do it. I'm going to demonstrate that. Okay, let's do our constraints for the label. And here I'm just going to click the constraints, and I'm just going to do 40 and 40. And then the top one, we want that to be to the paintball splash 5 image. And I'm going to say, let's make that 30. And I'll add those 3 constraints. Okay, that should be it for the constraints on those. So I'm going to come back over here to the view controller Swift file and just demonstrate the fact that if I try to control drag over to my view controller's Swift file, it doesn't do anything. It will not let me add an outlet or an action. But if we change this file to be our splash view controller, then we can control drag, and now I can create an outlet. And I'm going to call this one splash image. And then we're going to do the same thing for our label. Oops. Had the option key and not the control key. And this one we're going to call timer label. So we could name it LBL timer. Doesn't really matter as long as we're consistent in our code. I'm going to click connect. Same way, if using gear annotation, it could have been IMG splash, would have been another good name. I'm going to get rid of this commented code here on navigation. Get rid of this. So I'm going to create a variable up here after our outlets. And the variable is going to be my timer. It's going to be of type timer. That should be a capital T. It's going to start out being nil. So this is the timer we're going to use. Need to put an exclamation mark after timer. Since it hasn't been assigned a value yet, we're going to make it an optional. This is the timer we're going to use to time the sequencing of our splash images. Want another variable. And this one I'm going to call remaining. It's going to be an integer, and it's going to equal 5. And then I got an E after var. I want to create a list of the images that we put into our assets, because we're going to refer to those by index numbers. And so this will be easy to refer to them as our indices. Now, I set these up as numbered from 1 to 5. And of course, our list or our array starts with counting 0. So we're going to duplicate up the first one. So we do have an element 0, but we're really, to keep the numbering consistent, I'm going to have it really start with 1. Var slash equals and our images that we added to our assets were called paintball splash, and then numbers 1 through 5. So as I mentioned, I'm going to have the first one duplicated. So it's going to be both 0 and 1. We'll never use the 0. And then I'm going to have the third one will be 2, 3, 4, and 5. Bring my code over a little bit. We also want this to play a sound. So we're going to import our AV foundation. And I'm going to create a variable then of audio player. Capital P, audio. And it's going to equal AV audio player. Let me make that an optional. And I'm just going to add a comment of some asterisk. Just, I like to do that to separate my functions out, make it a little more readable. Usually I'll put a space and then that, another space. You don't have to put the spaces there. But we're going to write some functions. So,
Steve, do you need to take the comma after the paintball splash 5?
oh, I do. Thank you. Copy and paste error. We got a little error warning here. So I don't want the equal sign here. I want a colon. Okay, so audio player is of a type AV player, AV audio player. And if you don't put the AV foundation, you'll get an error on that one. So that's part of the AV foundation. Okay, so we have our view did load, which we're actually not going to do anything with, but we're going to override another function. 2R is an override. And this one is the view did appear. And it's going to have a parameter underscore space animated. Type bool. And we're going to call a function out of this of start timer. It doesn't understand start timer because we haven't created that function. Okay, I'm going to take my comments, just copy them. And so we're going to create our function for start timer, and I used a lowercase s rather than uppercase. We'll keep consistent. And it's not going to take any parameters. And we're going to take that variable remaining and set it equal to 5. Even though we initialize it at 5, we get by without doing that. It's just probably good practice. If we were to come back or maybe create some methodology where we wanted to run this a second time, we want to reset that to 5. We're going to use that number in a loop to determine which splash screen to show. Okay, so we're going to take splash image. And here we're going to set the image property equal to UI, not image view, UI image. I's are capitalized, UI image. And we can specify the image we want to load. So we're going to say named. And then splash element 5. So that splash element 5 is our 6th element of our list up here. That's the paintball splash 5. So we're going to start with that. Now again, we wouldn't need to do that because we've already set the image here, but if we wanted to refresh this somehow, it's good to put that in. Now we're going to create our timer. So we had that my timer we created up above as a class level variable, and we're going to set it equal to a timer instance or timer object. that's going to be dot scheduled timer. And we want the one that says with time interval. Our time interval, this is in seconds. So we're going to change that to 1.0. We're going to say this is going to repeat. So I'm going to change the bool to true. And then for our block, parenthesis here. So I'm going to change that to a parenthesis. This is going to be a closure. So I'm going to put curly brackets. My timer in. Space there. And then we're going to create some code. So this is basically another function that's not named. That's what a closure is. Those who came out of C#, it's basically a delegate. Self.timer label. That was that label we created. Now I have to use the word self here. When you're inside a closure, it needs to know that these are from the parent. So self.timer label dot text equals, and we're going to say opening in, and I'm going to do some interpolation. And again, we need self dot remaining seconds, and then I'll do my 3 ellipses, my 3 periods. So each time the timer fires, we're going to change the label text. We're going to take self.remaining, and we're going to decrement it. An if structure. So if self.remaining is equal to 0. So I just do it the other way. Let's do greater than 0. If it's greater than 0, we're going to do something. Otherwise, we're going to have an else fork, meaning it was 0. In our true fork, we're going to take self.splash image, and we're going to set the image to UI image, our named parameter. And then what we're going to do here is set it to self.splash. That's our array. And our index then is going to be self.remaining. So as this counts down, it's going to move lower in our array. Let's see, what's the error here? Misspelled image. And we're going to do let sfx equals splat. This is going to be our sound effect. Self.play audio. And we're going to play the audio of SFX. I suppose we could do this. This would be easier. I'm going to copy the word splat and just put that in here to SFX. That should be okay. And then we get rid of the let. That'll save us a line of code. So we're going to get an error here. And to fix that error, I'm just going to jump down here and let's add our function for play audio. And we're going to pass it, oops, audio, type string. So our function here for play audio is guard let URL equals, and we're going to get this from our bundle because we're including this in our file versus going out to the internet and getting it or getting it off our documents directory. So bundle.main.path, and for resource audio, and here's where we're going to specify the type of type MP3. If we had included that in the string, we'd have had to parse that out. Suppose I could have done a second parameter. If you want to do files or have mixed media files, maybe you want an AIFF file and some other type of audio files along with the MP3s, then you could pass two things to this or parse it out. It should be a comma, not a period. Since we're using guard, we can add an else fork here. So this will occur if that's false. And we're going to show alert. You know, I'm not even going to bother to do that. In my example, I had an alert pop up. Let's just say to do, just because of the interest of time, I'm going to say add alert to show. So I have an alert come up that would say that the file couldn't be found. Since it's bundled, that really should never happen. Use it maybe for error checking or something. Return. I'm just going to move my closing bracket up to there. We're going to do a do loop. And in our do loop, we're going to take audio player that we created above.
So you had those parentheses for the else. Were you going to take the else out?
Actually, no, that shouldn't be. Those should be curly brackets. Sorry. Yeah, those should be curly brackets. So it will only do this if it can't find the file in that path.
Okay.
Okay. So audio player equals, and we're going to try AV audio player. And it takes contents of as a parameter. And the contents that we want to play is a URL. And that URL is going to be our file URL with path. Lowercase URL. And there we want another parenthesis. Hard time seeing my type here. I think there's just two parentheses there.
I think player is misspelled.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Then we're just simply going to say audio player dot play. And that should play the file. Now I'm getting a problem here with the URL. Contents of URL, file URL with path. And I think the W needs to be uppercase. Okay. Well, so I think it's just not liking to try because we haven't done the catch fork yet. So let's say catch grab the error, and then again, what I would probably do here is show an alert. With regards to the error. Now, having done that, our little error on the play audio went away. Okay, so we still need to do our else fork. We've got a blank line here I'm going to get rid of. Somehow I set a breakpoint accidentally. Delete that. And in our else fork, we're going to end our timer. We've gone through all this, the full sequence. We no longer want to fire the timer, so we're going to say invalidate. That'll turn our timer off. Now we want to go to, at that point, to our other view controller. We're going to create a variable. We do this programmatically. Storyboard equals UI storyboard. Name main. We're going to get an error here if we haven't created that name yet. Bundle is going to be nil. And that should be an equals and not a minus sign. So I'm going to jump over to the storyboard real quick. I guess I still have this open, so come over here. I want to look at my main storyboard. And in the properties, actually, I'm going to select the storyboard itself, or the view controller itself, and I'm going to give it a title of main. I also want to come in here to storyboard ID and just name this main storyboard. I think we'll need that as well.
Sorry, where did you go to find that?
So I clicked on the view of my storyboard. This was the original one. And I like to do it here in the hierarchy. So I just clicked on view controller. In case there's something else I might accidentally select, like a view or something, and set the storyboard ID in the identity inspector to main storyboard. And then in the attributes inspector, set the title to main. Make sure you press the enter key. When you do that, it's going to put main here in the hierarchy as the name.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Now I'm going to go back to my code. And this error of, let's see, identify UI storyboard. All right, we're going to continue on and see what happens here as we add more code. Let main controller
I think the B might be lowercase.
Let's try that. There you go. Thank you, Marianne. Okay, main controller equals, and here we're going to take our storyboard. And this one is also, no, this is an uppercase because that's how I put it as our variable earlier, or a constant storyboard. So we had it here with a capital B. Dot instantiate, and we're going to instantiate the view controller. Let's see, we got two of them here. We can go with the third one, just the view controller. And our identifier is going to be that ID we set up in the identity inspector, which was main storyboard. And we'll see if I used a lowercase b there or not. That probably should be in quotes. Now, just to be safe, I'm going to click over here on my main view controller. So main storyboard, capital S, lowercase b. Okay. I'm going to say self.present. And here we're going to present our main controller we just created. Animated is going to be true. And this is where we're going to use that little page curl. And the last parameter here is completion, and we're going to set it to no. What I did earlier is I set the splash screen back to 5, although I don't think we'll even see that happen, but say splash image. Dot image equals UI image. Again, we'll do named self.splash and element 5. Blank lines. Okay, everything seems to be okay. No errors coming up. We've got a couple warnings. An error here that we're not using. We can always do, so we can create a variable to put that error into, but then we got to do something with that variable. We're going to get a warning as well. I guess we could just say, we could replace it with an underscore so we don't use it. Or let's just do this. Let's just create a catch. We'll get rid of that. Okay, we're going to try this. Oh, we need to set a couple attributes in our main screen. Okay, we're not getting the image. But it did go to our main screen. So why are we not getting the image? Because I misspelled splash in my case. Let's try this again. Before I go there, I'm going to go back to the storyboard, take my main storyboard, and go into the attributes. I'm going to set this to aspect fill, or aspect fit rather. You notice it kind of came up as a overlaying page, and I want it to go all the way to the top. And then, let's come back to our view controller. Here we go. Let's set the size. I believe it's inferred, I think. So on the view controller, in the attributes inspector, there's this presentation. It says automatic. Let's change it. Oh, this is where we want to change it. I want to change it to full screen. And then the transition style from cover vertical, let's make that the partial curl. That'll give us that little animated page curl. So when we chose animated true, this is what it does. It looks at the transition style and applies it. Now I'm going to try this again. Hopefully we'll get our splash screen this time. Okay, I'm not hearing the audio, but I'm getting the image. You saw the little page curl as it went to that page. So we're not getting the audio, so let's figure out why that is. So
You called it splash. Was it splat?
it's splat, yes. Two words too similar. Always a danger. So let's go back to our code here. Actually, I'm just going to get rid of this. So yes, thank you, Tony. That should be splat. And let's try it again. There we go. So we now have our animated splash screen going to our main view, and then we had that launch screen at the very beginning. So a couple of those keys that are easy to miss out on are in our storyboard to make sure you choose the view controller. And actually this aspect fit, I think, could probably still say scale to fill, because the key here was I wanted this to be full screen for the presentation. You can play around with the different transition styles if you wanted. I think the partial curl is kind of cool. But the key here is make sure you set the title, because we use that in our code in the attributes inspector, and you set the storyboard ID, because we use that in our code as well. And then you can do whatever project you want to do in your main storyboard.